Have you ever wanted to get involved in real estate development, but didn't know where to begin? Do you think real estate development is only for the large hedge funds or major corporations, the big guys? Or have you done some development in the past and are looking to scale up? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to the W.I.R.E.D Wealth and Real Estate Development Podcast. I am your host, Nick Smith. Get ready to have your mind blown and rewired as we discuss all aspects of creating wealth and real estate development. Well, good day, everybody. This is episode 6 of the W.I.R.E.D Wealth and Real Estate Development Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Smith, and today we have a very special guest with us, the lovely Miss Sherry Ziller. She is the Executive Director of the Northwest Indiana Regional Development Authority, better known as RDA. She's a native of Hammond, Indiana, and I am delighted to have her. Today she's going to explain to us, because I'm sure a lot of you probably have never even heard of the RDA, let alone know what the RDA does. So if you've heard of this, I'm sure Sherry's going to tell us all of that. But before then, I would like Sherry to definitely just give us a brief introduction, where you're from, how you got started with what you're doing, just some brief background on you.
Sure, Nicholas. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Sherry Ziller. I am the President and CEO at the Northwest Indiana Regional Development Authority. I've been there for 17 years, believe it or not. We were created in 2005. We are a quasi-state government agency. So our legislators back then saw all the assets that Northwest Indiana had. And then when they're looking at it, they saw also, and this isn't necessarily a negative thing, it was just an issue that definitely needed to be tackled. So it was our underperforming assets. So our Lake Michigan shoreline and having access to it. Having a functioning regional airport in the Gary-Chicago International Airport. It was also a regional bus system that Northwest Indiana had been lacking for many years. And then it was also our commuter rail system, which if you have heard of the RDA, then you would know that the first, I would say our formative years, our first decade, we focused on those 3 major infrastructure projects. And then the last 10 years and so on, hopefully for many more years, we have been focusing on the expansion, the extension of the South Shore commuter rail line. So that would include the West Lake Corridor project and then also the Double Track project. So we looked at it and we thought, you know what, we are sorely lacking. If you just look at the Illinois side of the rail system, we had one rail system, one line, that's it. If you look at the metro line, it's just a spider web of all the suburbs that their rail lines reach, from downtown Chicago to the Loop, and that's where all the jobs are. And we are not that far from Chicago. And then the question was, okay, then how can we make the case that we need to capitalize on our proximity to Chicago to get our residents here in Northwest Indiana faster access to the market so they can have access to the job and then come back home to Northwest Indiana, live here, buy their homes here. That's always been our goal, and spend their money that they earn in Chicago and help to stimulate our regional economy here in Northwest Indiana. So that is a very high-level overview of what we've been doing for almost 2 decades now, and I've been very fortunate to be there pretty much the entire time.
Wonderful. I actually, and I believe we may have talked about this before, but I have a City of East Chicago employment background. I used to actually work for the Department of Redevelopment. And the City of East Chicago did many various things with the Department of Redevelopment. But one name that we used to hear frequently in our office was Bill Hammer.
Yeah.
And that was your predecessor. He worked with my then executive director, who was John Artis. And I know they had a lot of communication, various things. One in particular is the lakefront, because a lot of people don't realize that East Chicago, Hammond, Gary, a lot of people think of Miller Beach but don't realize the rest of the areas, the surrounding areas do have somewhat of a lakefront. So I know that RDA was involved, in some of the lakefront beautifications that have happened in East Chicago and the surrounding areas.
Yeah, those were very big projects for the RDA. And so another name that comes to mind is Congressman Pete Visclosky, because he's the author of the Marquette Plan. So when our legislators downstate in 2005, when they were looking at our underperforming assets, shoreline was at the very top of the list. And Congressman Visclosky had laid out the plan called, the Marquette Plan. And it said, here's how you get access to our beautiful shoreline. And before that plan had existed, the shoreline was there, but we didn't, we were talking earlier, I grew up in Hammond, and although the shoreline's beautiful, you're looking at it and access wise, saying, well, how do I get to explore that? And then what can I do? What can we do as a region and as a state to help with the beautification of that, to then entice development and then hand it over essentially back to our communities to say, okay, well, we did the beautification here. We followed that Marquette Plan that Congressman Visclosky created for all of us to follow, and who used to work with, Mr. John Artis, and my predecessor, Bill Hanna, and our entire team collectively, we were able to revitalize and restore 55 miles of shoreline throughout Lake and Porter County.
That is a beautiful thing, and it's something I'm definitely looking forward to seeing further enhanced. When we speak about the Marquette Plan, because I became familiar with the Marquette Plan again during my time with the city of East Chicago, is that something, because the Marquette Plan encompassed, all of the, local municipalities and cities that had, property abutting to the lakefront or lakefront property. Do you see that plan still kind of being adhered to, or municipalities, have they kind of swayed away from it? Or do you think, the local cities are still kind of working within that plan?
I think, that's one of those plans, a lot of plans, they get written and they might be just fine plans, but they're not an implementation plan.
Right.
That one is an implementation plan. So when the state gave the RDA the charge and the wherewithal to make a significant difference in our infrastructure, so our shoreline for the 55 miles, I think that was a huge game changer for our communities. And, so our dollars only stretched so far, but that was okay, because then we were able to hand over, the operations and the maintenance and any other follow on construction, anything that the communities wanted to do then. So from my perspective, they're still very much following it, and they're able to be creative on what they like to see. And, for the Marquette Plan, I think it's important to remember that the communities came to the RDA with their vision. We had a plan, we had a guideline, but each of our communities, we're talking how many communities are our shoreline communities, 8, 10, a dozen. So it was not a one size fits all. What Hammond would have wanted on their shoreline was much different than, say, what Porter would want on their shoreline, or East Chicago. So we sat with each of the communities, and we learned about their visions and what do you want. So it's pretty interesting to just drive the shoreline, if anyone would ever want to do that or have the time or have already done that. And you'll see that they're all similar in what they have to offer, but they all have their own personality in what our communities wanted to see. So we were there to say, okay, we're going to make your vision come to life. And we spent the very first decade, a little bit after that, doing just that.
Awesome. Yes, the shoreline, definitely, you can see some distinct differences when you cross the different cities. And again, each city, I think that's one of the benefits and the challenges with Northwest Indiana, is because we do have so many cities within Lake County, and even across Porter County. The population of Lake County is the same population as some large one cities. So we have multiple cities, you have multiple different interests and people to kind of please. But one thing that has always struck me about our lakefront is that historically our lakefront was used primarily for industry. You had a lot of the steel mills that were on the lakefront, and, for various reasons. Of course, industry is what built this region, with the steel mills and various factories. Do you see an opportunity to kind of mesh entertainment with industry on the lakefronts?
Sure. Yeah. I think there's a lot of opportunities for any sort of entertainment, land-based casinos. That's been a big part of Northwest Indiana. We might be able to get a convention center. I know we'll probably talk about that a little bit later. I think the possibilities are endless on what our communities would want to see there. And, our steel mills are the anchor, the industries are our anchors here in Northwest Indiana. They're not going anywhere, but I think it's such a huge part of our culture and our communities that there's plenty of opportunities still left to kind of collaborate and, mesh, as you would say, the entertainment aspect of it with the shoreline.
Wonderful. So you mentioned the convention center, so we can bring that up.
Yeah.
Senator Eddie Melton.
Yeah.
Of course, he sponsored a bill to get a convention center here in Northwest Indiana. Location is still to be determined.
Sure.
What role did RDA play in facilitating that process?
Yeah, Senator Eddie Melton did a great job getting the components of this bill passed. So there's other components in it. It somewhat over time got dubbed as the convention center bill. That's what's new. It's what's exciting. And the RDA back in 2017, we were tasked by the Lake County Commissioners to conduct a feasibility study for a convention center.
Okay.
Back then, it was a different environment in that, we didn't really know what the interest would have been. So a logical step would be to start the feasibility studies. Is it even possible to have a convention center here in Northwest Indiana? So the RDA did that. We went through the process, and it turned out it is possible for many of our communities to have a convention center. And there's a lot that went into proximity to a major interstate. How much acreage do you have? And, 10 to 12 other things that had to qualify. So what the feasibility study did was it ranked the top 10 locations where a convention center could be located potentially. So very interesting. I learned more about convention centers than I ever thought I would. So it was a very, kind of fun process for me to go through. And then we presented that to Lake County Commissioners. And so back then there might have been interest, but that kind of faded away, back then. Mm-hmm. So fast forward to 2023, Senator Eddie Melton wanted to resurrect that discussion, and we're all glad that he did. So where it landed was, and Senator Melton read the feasibility report. We went through it with him the first time, so he was armed with the knowledge of what could happen in Northwest Indiana. This is pre-COVID, remember? So, he understood that, and he worked with all the right people downstate to get it passed. So now the RDA has been charged with updating the feasibility study. So we're in the very beginning process of doing that. And then the Lake County will present that again to the Lake County Commissioners. The difference, though, this time, Nicholas, is the state now has an interest in it, and they have a financial interest in it. So if and when proposals start coming in, and the commissioners, they will again be armed with the knowledge of the results of the updated feasibility study, and the proposals ought to align with the content of that and make sure that each proposal is moving forward with those core principles in mind on what to do with a convention center and how to put their package together, how to put their team together. And then we'll see if the Lake County Commissioners, if they like one of the proposals, then they could possibly move forward with it. And then I think the 7-member board will be created, and the RDA, our role in that will be the fiscal manager for the construction of an eventual convention center here in Northwest Indiana.
Exciting.
It is, yeah.
That is exciting. If you think about it, Lake County is the second largest county in the state, and we've never really had a convention center. Yeah. I remember growing up, I think the Star Plaza was probably our quasi-convention center.
That's back in 2018, kind of, I guess what maybe triggered well, we didn't know what the interest was. We just knew Star Plaza wasn't going to be there anymore. Right. So what are we going to do if there is a need for this, if there's a want for this, if somebody out there wants to fund this, if we don't have Star Plaza anymore? So yeah, that's what started the conversation. And I'm glad it did. Sometimes you start a conversation 5-10 years ago, you think nothing's going to happen with it, but really it just might be a hiatus to get to,
Right.
Where Senator Melton got. Well, I want to do this bill and I want it to have a few different components, one of which is the convention center. And, he put in there also the Erie Metro Center and I know we'll probably talk about the transit development districts here later on, but he was able to, with the, help of some of the other legislators in the House, to get funding to completely reconstruct the Erie Metro Center, which it sorely needs.
That's huge.
Yeah. So we were all very excited when it crossed the finish line. It didn't look like what it did at the beginning, but it never does, and that's okay. But the RDA, we will be allowed to create a transit development district around the Erie Metro station. So the timing's excellent in the reconstruction of the center, because then we can create a district around it.
Amazing.
And we can also do some demolition of some blighted property within the transit development district of the Erie Metro Center. So
amazing.
all positive stuff. Yeah.
Definitely. We talked a little bit about this before this episode got started, but when you came on with RDA, most of the time people don't think of a quasi-governmental agency being a startup. We think of tech startups, we think of, for-profit, so to speak, startups, but we don't think of quasi-governmental startups. What were some of the challenges you all ran into as the RDA back in the early days, the 2006s? What were some of the startup challenges you all ran into?
It's surreal to even think about who we were back then, and it's so different now. I mean, I guess we would have been considered a startup organization. And so we were considered quasi-state government. Gosh, our challenges, it probably if I had to pick, first thing that comes to mind is who is the RDA? Why are we here? Why were we created? Why do we have all this funding? What are we going to do with it? Who's on your board of directors? What are you going to fund? So I think there was some trepidation with the community. Well, I don't know what we want to do here. And I think we just needed to make it clear that, we were here to help fund major infrastructure decisions for our communities that they likely couldn't do by themselves. And that's not a negative thing. That is something to say, let's put all of our resources together. And now that we are an extension of this state, if you will, we'll probably be able to do much larger projects. Whereas if without it, they may not have, So some of our first projects were Wolf Lake Shoreline project in Hammond. We bought 10 new train cars for NICD. That was one of our very first projects.
And for those that don't know who NICD is a Northwest Indiana commuter train district.
Community transportation.
Community transportation.
They're the train operators. Sorry. Yeah.
South Shore Train.
South Shore Train. They are South Shore Train. A very good partner of the RDA. So and then it was, then it was meeting with the communities and just saying, okay, here's how we can work together. And, it took very strong leadership to be able to get us to that point where we became a trusted entity, not just in the state side, but all of our municipalities too, that we're working with. They had such grand visions and on varying levels, varying scales. It might have just never been on paper, it might have just been a thought, or they might have had, papers, they might have had already drawn out and were thinking how I would never have been able to bring that to life, but let's see what the RDA can do. So we funded quite a few multi-million-dollar projects right from the get-go because we had the ability to do so. We extended the main runway at the Erie Chicago International Airport, many partners there. Then I think people started realizing, okay, they can work with local government, they can work with regional entities, they can work with state government, they can work with federal government. Okay, so they're a true player in this game, and let's see what they can do. And I would like to say and to think that from my predecessor, like you mentioned earlier, Bill Hanna, and there was one before him, there was Tim Sanders, and our entire board of directors throughout the years, that we've been able to accomplish, quite a few remarkable projects here in Northwest Indiana. And we are considered a very trusted entity with resources. And I would like to think that that's why typically the state legislature during the General Assembly would commonly give the RDA tasks to do, such as being the fiscal agent for a convention center or commissioning a study on a need for a trauma center here in Northwest Indiana. Some of them are, kind of out of left field, but then other ones like the Geary Metro Center and the demolition of blighted properties, the transit development districts that we're working on currently. We're talking about real money here that we've been fortunate enough to have built a great team to be able to make smart decisions and manage those dollars.
Okay. So you've mentioned the term transit development district a couple times. Yep. So let's go into transit development district. And this is how actually I knew of you, but when the transit development districts came about, started hearing you talk about them in different venues and different speaking engagements. So what is a transit development district and what role are those districts playing here in Northwest Indiana right now?
Sure. Transit development districts came about through legislation back in 2017. Representative Hal Slager authored that bill, and it was towards the end of our other two train projects getting approved. So when I say that, I mean the Westlake Corridor project, and the approval for that, we needed some state dollars. So the RDA, we put forward some of our funding, a significant amount of the funding. The federal government, again with Congressman Pete Visclosky, that was his other major project, signature legacy project that he worked on while in office. And then the double track project. So we have these two rail projects at the state. We were able to successfully make the case saying, all right, here's why we think we need to extend the rail line and to get to Chicago faster. And then in terms of jobs, when we started looking at this, we said, okay, and I've said this in many of my presentations that, those jobs in and of itself create a lot of jobs, but they're temporary, and that's great for the construction industry. It's really great. Right. And that's, something that's needed. It makes a lot of people happy. And the other part of it though was, okay, but all of the funding that folks are putting in, what is the true return on investment? And the way to get that return on everyone's investment was to create what was thought of as the transit development district. So they operate like a TIP district. Around each of our train stations, we're able to put a boundary. And it's not just a circle. This is a very thoughtful process, very collaborative process, many, many hours working with my team and the communities to sit down, understand again, like I was saying at the beginning, hey, let's talk about train stuff now. What's your vision for your train station? Now we're talking development. What sort of development do you want to see in your community? And it allows our communities to maybe not be so reactive when a developer contacts them and says, okay, this is what I want to put in your community. I think it opens up the conversation for our community to now say, yeah, let's work on that. This is more what our vision is, and let's see what we can do together. And the game changer, though, on that one is now the communities have funds to work with. So these districts have incremental revenue from property tax and local option income tax. Okay. Though that increment, because of the train, comes to the RDA. So we have oversight over that. And when a community would like to work with a developer, whether they were approached by the development community or they reached out themselves, or however that might work, and there's a development that they're serious about and they want us to look into, the RDA, I can deploy my team. I have experts, I have financial experts, economic development experts, planning experts from all over the United States, and they can start working on those projects with our communities. And our communities have been so great to work with. They want us at the table with the developers. They're now able to be at the table with the developers and be able to actually negotiate on some things that they would like to see. So they wouldn't necessarily, the communities, that is, assume all of the risk. Maybe before they might have been, all right, they're so excited to get this development, they don't want to lose it, and they sign on the dotted line, and they have assumed a lot of risk now. So it kind of alleviates that a little bit. gives them a fair voice at the table and more of a collaborative process. And it's not what the RDA wants to see. We're not experts in what you should have in your community. We want to know, what do you want to see in your community? My team will work with you saying, okay, well, and you've seen this in a lot of my presentations, saying, here's housing options that are available that you can look into, mixed use development, commercial, industry. At the end of the day, our communities are still in charge of zoning and permitting. Right. So the RDA would not, we cannot, nor would we want to come in and just say, you will zone it that way. It will be that way. That's not how this process works. So it's really been great to see that. So even before the train projects are finished, they're still under construction right now. Even before there's $1 in any of those transit development districts that I just talked about, they don't start generating funds until next year, believe it or not. It takes a long time to get them established. And then the year is 2024. But what's interesting is developers, they're not waiting for that, and they don't have to. So if you just look at Hammond and Michigan City, and these are the two I commonly talk about when I'm out and about, they together, if you added, they're already, at least 400 million into development projects. And like I said, the trains aren't even up and running yet. These districts haven't even been able to fund any of those. We would love to. We would love to say, hey, wait, if we'd like to be a part of this. But then at the same time, it's like, that's fine. If you want to move forward, that's all the better. If you want to develop within those transit development districts, that's what we're marketing to do. That's what we want you to do. Then it's kind of this, cycle of development. Money comes in, we're able to bond now if we wanted to for a project, and we pay it back with the increment that comes in. So there's a sunset date, 2047. That's why we want to get them established here shortly. We have 7 established. We're working on the next 4 or 5. We hope to get those established by the end of fall this year. So that goes through a public engagement process, public hearing, and then I would go down with my team to Indianapolis, to the state budget committee, have them review the boundaries, and then hopefully get their sign off on it. And then the funds, start flowing in the following year. So that's our process. And so, like I said, we have, I don't know, maybe 12, it's pretty much every station on the line, including the new ones on the Westlake line, that we're able to have a district. If there's ever a new station, like, the downtown Hammond station, I know that they are really excited about it. It's not technically on the Westlake line, but if there ever were to be a station that came after the fact, we would of course look into creating a district around that station. So they would have more incentive to work with developers and have them come in and want to develop there. So.
Wow. So I want to unpack some stuff that you talked about there, but you gave us a lot to ponder.
Yeah, sorry about that. Just tell me to stop.
It was a lot to ponder. The Westlake Corridor. Yeah. Of course, I'm familiar with the term. I know what it is, but I don't want to take for granted that everybody knows what the Westlake Corridor is. What is the Westlake Corridor project, and coupled with the double tracking?
Sure. Okay. So the Westlake Corridor project that's the one that extends the rail line from Hammond south to Munster and Dyer. And Hammond gets a new station. It's called the Gateway Station. Then that's where it changes over. And then it goes, like I said, from Munster to Dyer. So there's 4 new stations on the line. The current Hammond one on Holman will be closed. So Hammond will have a South Hammond station, Hammond Gateway, and then there's Munster Ridge Road, we call it, and then the Munster Dyer station. Mm-hmm. That is the expansion of the rail service. So NICD, when I was talking about that earlier, Northern Indiana Commuter Transportation District, they're the ones who are overseeing the construction of it, and the RDA is the fiscal agent for both of the rail projects. So then the double track project, so there's certain parts on the rail line that are single tracked. So how we always explain it is, it's imagine 2-way traffic on a 1-lane road. Mm-hmm. And so that doesn't work too well. So there are parts of the current line that had been double tracked, and then there are parts that had not been double tracked. So ideally you'd want it all double tracked so there wouldn't be the delays. So what double track does is wherever there was a gap in the single line, we went ahead and constructed another line, if you know track. So now there's essentially 2 tracks, so 2 ways. So you can get to your destination, downtown Chicago, in a lot quicker time now. So very attractive to developers. Both of those projects, very attractive to people looking to maybe live in Northwest Indiana or trying to talk about population earlier, so that's kind of the beginning of all of this. We looked at the Lake County and Porter County population and we thought, wow, that's really dwindling. And why is that? And we started really looking into this, saying, why are we losing all of our business opportunities to our neighbors, to, Illinois or, Michigan or Wisconsin, and then we started realizing, okay, well, look at the rail system, just our neighbors right in Illinois, and their jobs pay 40% higher than all of ours, I think, for the exception of manufacturing jobs. So this is the case we've been making for, seems like a decade now, and the numbers were real. They were right there, and it was fairly easy for anyone to say, you know what, we are a competitor of Chicago, and we are a suburb of Chicago. Talk about a major challenge. That was the other one too. Convincing and making the case that, is Northwest Indiana a true suburb of Chicago? I think they are. Many of us think they are. So we just got to get out there and just make the case that we are. And, we have the same shoreline that Chicago has. And we don't have the jobs right now. That's clear. No argument there, but you gotta start somewhere. You got to do these major multi-million-dollar projects, put us on the map to get us out there. So the state has been very generous with the projects that they'd like to see, the tasks that they'd like to see, and have the RDA, lead that. We've been doing that for quite some time now. So we're seeing some changes. We're seeing very positive impact. So we projected, probably conservatively, that the return on that investment, so how we measure the impact, would be $2.7 billion in development. And like I said earlier, we're 400 million towards that. I love saying that in my presentation. We're 400 million. And, the train project, I think Westlake finishes construction and 2025, double track might be May of 2024. Both of them are around May. So we still have some time for it to finish. And that development community, as you would know, and we're getting in on that game. We're doing it right now, which is, I think, the smart thing to do.
100%. I am selfishly watching the transit development districts myself, just throwing it out there. But
that's how I met you.
Exactly.
I see when I have a speaking engagement, you're there and you always come up to talk to me afterwards. You always have very kind things to say and great questions. And so I'm happy to be on your podcast now.
I appreciate
have a longer conversation about it.
Definitely. I know you don't work for NICTIC,
right?
The commuter train district, but I'm just curious because you work closely with them. Mm-hmm. Do you ever think, because I used to work for the University of Chicago after I left the city of East Chicago, so I took the South Shore into Hyde Park regularly, if not daily, definitely 3 to 4 times a week. And trains were packed. I mean, they were packed at that time. I mean, you had to park a mile away. I used to take the station from East Chicago, sometimes in Hammond.
Yeah, the busiest station, I believe, in Chicago.
Exactly. Do you think the ridership will ever get back to pre-pandemic levels?
I knew you were going to ask that. And Mike Nolan, the CEO over at South Shore Railroad, is always in the hot seat with that question. So I have listened to his answer many times. And I think he's right. It's one of those things where we don't know. You can't really say yes and you can't say no. And when listening to him, when he explains it, saying, you got to just watch and see what happens here. And we realized, they took a hit with COVID, with their ridership. There's no denying that. But things change so much over time. We're just coming out of the pandemic, and I think the work environment and locations have changed. I think folks are able to work a lot more from home if they choose to, but I think there's a good quantity of people that prefer the office environment, and jobs are created, which is what we're trying to do here. I do think that's going to have a very positive impact on increased ridership. But again, we're not fortune tellers. We are moving, forward with no one anticipated the pandemic and the ridership and how we are now, but economies can change. We just have to make smart decisions and what we're doing today to help change the impact later on if we can. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
100% agree. 100% agree. It's in the commercial real estate world where I am. Of course, office space has tremendously changed since before the pandemic. That's probably the one sector of commercial real estate that's suffering right now because a lot of buildings, a lot of commercial office space is vacant. It's empty. And communities and, developers, stakeholders are trying to figure out what to do with the space.
Yeah.
Whether to repurpose it. You hear a lot of communication and ideas for repurposing some of that office space back into, residential or downsizing the commercial, doing some mixed use, things like that. And I actually think that's where some of that transit oriented development could really, be a game changer, in some of these communities, especially ours here in Northwest Indiana.
Sure. That's definitely not lost upon us. We work with the experts in the field of planning, MKSK. They're part of our team and they're watching the trends right now as we work with KPMG, we work with policy analytics, and they're able to work back with the communities saying, okay, let's rethink how what you want to see for now your transit oriented development. And that's even changed even prior to COVID. Some of them, it was one of those things where it's like, okay, we're saying the train is coming, but not a lot of people bought into that, and that's okay. We had our work cut out for us, but we said, no, the train is coming. And when we were working with our communities back in, say 2016 or 17, maybe even before then, maybe more like 2015. And we start looking at their plans for what are you going to do around the train station? Some of them just, train's not coming. So, and they weren't planning for TOD.
This extension, Westlake Corridor have been in the works for what?
Oh gosh.
30 years?
The 90s, from what I hear, definitely predates my start in this world, but in the development world. But yeah, so the conversations, even before COVID, they were changing back then. So we said, okay, train is coming, and then funding eventually fell into place. So then that's one of the key resources that the RDA is able to offer our community, saying, okay, we're happy to work with your staff here to get your plan up to date and to say, to see what it is you want to see in there now, because the train is coming. So let's look at this a different way. And, they're very innovative in their thinking. And I think the communities appreciate that. So even with the change in COVID and the atmosphere with the, office space and what's going on there and the issues that developers are having, say, what do we do with this space? I think we'll be able to come up with something that suits us and just be able to plan for the future, even though there's so many unknowns. Right. Sometimes you got to take those risks. Right. Calculate this.
Now, you mentioned that there were 7 approved transit development districts or TDDs. Yeah. You mentioned that what 7 have been approved so far?
Yeah. So, okay, I don't have that in front of me. I should have.
Pop quiz.
Michigan City. East Chicago was in there. Yep. Hammond, Gateway was in there. Munster Ridge, Munster Dyer, and here in Miller. Okay. And I don't know if I've named 6 or 7 so far, but
that's enough. You've named enough.
So we work in Lake and Porter County. So at the beginning of the RDA, that's our jurisdiction, Lake and Porter County. But the interesting thing with the train projects, because double track actually does go into 2 other counties, right. LaPorte and St. Joe. So it does actually go all the way to South Bend. The RDA is able to partner with those communities, even though they're not technically members of the RDA. So we've been able to work with 4 counties and broaden our reach with them. So that's been kind of enlightening to be able to do their transit development districts too. So the Michigan City one, because then now we get to work with 2 extra counties and kind of, learn what it is they'd like to see. Man, Michigan City, I don't know if you've been around there or not, but yeah. I mean, just in the past few years.
They've gone gangbusters.
How they were. And people love Michigan City. They're a great community to work with. It does not take very much to get people interested in what's going on there. So good for them. And we hope the rest for the rest of our communities too. Hammond's doing very well with their residential development there too. Yeah.
I am very anxious to see what downtown, because I hear, of course, and you're from Hammond, I'm from East Chicago.
Yeah.
I hear all of the historic memories of what downtown Hammond used to be.
Yeah.
Even downtown East Chicago, but
Yeah.
downtown Hammond, I mean, used to be one of the most thriving downtowns in the area.
Yeah.
And so I'm very anxious to see, because there's literally like about 350, I think, apartments that are underway, that are currently under construction in downtown Hammond. They're redoing Holman Avenue, which is the main street through downtown Hammond. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think they'll get there. I think they'll get back to maybe not exactly where they were, but they're going to, I think, have a very bustling downtown. They enlisted the services of Jeff Speck, who is apparently is a celebrity in the planning world. No, he is. He's great. And so they're working with the best of the best. They reimagined Holman Avenue and they're implementing it. Yep. So it's not just a plan, it's an implementation plan. So, and then I've also been fortunate enough to tour the Bay Calumet building. Right. That's a historic building there. And
redeveloped.
Oh, that's going to be
I can't wait.
So amazing when it's amazing now. Yeah. And, they're keeping a lot of the integrity of the history of it. So the architecture and the arches and marble and all that, kind of ornate decor in there. So they have major plans with that, and it's under construction. So, and they're filling their residents their spots right now. So that one's going to be pretty amazing. And they have, if you're standing in the Bay Calumet building, you look right across the street, because development breeds development. So They have even more stuff going on right across the street. Right. And it's fun for me to look at because I'm from Hammond. So I can only imagine those, currently living there. Wow, this is actually happening. And I think it's going to continue to happen. That's just phase one.
100% agree. 100%. I know you got your education. You're a bachelor's in political science.
Yeah.
Right? Bachelor's in political science, and you have a master's in education.
I do. Yeah.
Did you ever envision, or what did you envision on doing with those degrees before you got involved with the RDA?
Well, it's one of those. It's the best laid plan, So all I knew was I just wanted to go to college. I wanted to explore some things out there that this is going to sound weird, that I wasn't necessarily sharp in. And I'll be honest. So I had a few majors in undergrad, like most people. I'm interested in, graphic design, visual design, communications, things like that. Loved it. But I thought, man, I really want to challenge myself here. And I started talking with some folks, and I switched my major freshman year to political science. And I just wanted to learn it. I wanted to understand, all theory. And there was even a class called Lake County Politics that Mayor Tom McDermott Jr. taught. He was my professor.
That would have been interesting.
It was who better to teach Lake County politics than Mayor Tom? So I thought it was a great program. Glad I did it. I got my bachelor's and it had no idea what I wanted to do with it, because while I was getting my bachelor's, which I went back a little bit later, I wasn't the traditional, right out of high school. I went and got my associate's degree in computers and did that. I love doing that. That transitioned into teaching. So that's, the segue into why did I get my master's in education? Mm-hmm. And that would be why. So I wanted two different disciplines, if that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't make sense these days. Maybe back then it didn't make sense, but it felt like the right decision. I am pleased that I went that route, because I ended up working, I would say, in the political environment. Mm-hmm. So I am utilizing, my degree in many ways, but I love education too. So, it's one of those things where you don't know what the future holds. And while I was teaching, it was very rewarding. And I hope it was rewarding for my students as well. And I would love to get back into it one day. So it allows me that ability to, kind of do both on, at whichever stage I'm at in my life.
And I think I heard through another interview I was watching, you started off teaching a class on Microsoft Access.
Yeah, it was Access, yeah.
Microsoft Access.
Yeah, not everyone's favorite Microsoft Office productivity
No, not at all.
program, but yeah, that was interesting. It's not the easiest one to teach,
No.
but
Not the easiest one to use either.
right. Yeah. So I worked for it was Sawyer College, so it was the bus from Hammond. Then it became Kaplan College. And yeah, teacher, she had been there many years and then she couldn't finish out her class for, whatever reason. And they were kind of, oh gosh, how are we going to do this? And I was already there. I'd gone to school for computers. And the students actually, because I was helping them anyway, I would always be one of those people that, once they had lab time and they had questions, I would help the teacher out. So I was comfortable with the program. So yeah, they just said, you know what, the students asked for me. And that's what I started doing. And they said, can Sherry finish up the class? She's already here anyway. And at first I was like, no, I cannot do it. But then I thought, okay, all right, I'm going to do it. Why not? Got to take risks sometimes. And I thought it was going to be short term, a few weeks that we'd be done. Students didn't miss out, didn't skip a beat. And, everyone was happy. Turns out I really liked it. So I went to my then boss and said, thank you for the opportunity. It was great. I think, from the student surveys, they were just as happy as I was with the outcome. If you ever have any classes, I'm here to help out the college. And they did. And they kept giving me more classes. And I taught a lot of computer classes, Word, Excel, Access, PowerPoint. And then career development courses, academic strategies. I even dabbled a little bit into networking, computer networking, and that fun stuff. I've probably forgotten it all by now. But then when I was a little bit sharper in my younger years, it was great. What a great experience. Yeah, I loved helping people. And I did that for quite some time. I started teaching, I probably shouldn't say this, but I was 20 years old when I started teaching.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. But it's amazing, though, a lot of times when you look back on your earlier careers before you're doing what you're doing now, there's still some common threads amongst most people, even in the development space. Most people do not start off as developers. They get experience doing something else. And even a lot of times, I had no idea that I would be working for a local government as my first job out of college.
Right.
I didn't have matter of fact, I didn't even know the city of Chicago had a Department of Redevelopment, let alone what it did.
Yeah.
But it was a breeding ground. A lot of those first stops, we can't underestimate the importance of those first stops.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
one thing that I've learned.
It will feed into whatever road, you get on, wherever it takes you. Even if it's a completely different field, it does prepare you and it provides insight into, I think, any career that anyone would want to have. So I'm just, fortunate enough to be able to have had kind of a diverse career path. And,
Right.
Now I'm, more political in the political arena, economic development, working with developers. And I love them just as much as I love teaching. So it's been good. It's been good for I think Northwest Indiana too, to have somebody who's, pretty passionate about this and wants to see a good job being done and wanting to work with our partners. And, like you said, RDA and NICD, and, it's such a collaborative effort and a partnership.
Sure.
And yeah, I could be out there and doing a speaking engagement and we'll find a common thread of, why we're, 3 or 4 of us are there. We might be talking about completely different things, but we're all after the same thing, which is to make Northwest Indiana a better place while we're here, while we have the opportunity.
100%. So last 2 questions, because I can talk to you for hours about this, but I'm going to be respectful and reasonable for sure.
That's
The last 2 questions. Now you've been with RDA since its inception, since 2006. So it's getting close to 20 years. It's coming up on 20 years. I know you may not be able to pick a favorite project that you've worked on or a favorite venture that you've taken with the RDA, but what are some of the, I would say, most notable or most memorable projects that you smile when you see them completed right now?
That train project was such a heavy lift. And I'll tell you, there were a lot of folks out there, our friends, that you're not going to get this done. And people that we would normally go to for advice, this isn't going to happen. You're not going to get the funding for this. But, you mentioned Bill Hanna, and he talked about passion for Northwest Indiana. Thank goodness he was where he was when the time was right and when the funding was there. And I was so fortunate to be on that team. I remember when the legislation passed I pulled into the parking lot and I saw his vehicle there. So, okay, good, he's there. Because once it passed, once the governor signed it, that was real. And I remember I pulled in the parking lot and I saw his credit. I ran up the stairs and we had the paper and we're like, wait, God, we actually got the funding. How is this even possible? So many people so excited. We thought at some point we weren't gonna get it done. But to get that funding for the Westlake and Double Check, that project is it's so important to Northwest Indiana. That's how we move forward here. That's how we change the landscape of Northwest Indiana. That's how we get new residents. That's how we get new jobs. That's how we get businesses to take a look at us. So that will always be a highlight of my career, that I was able to work on that team under Bill Hanna, going down to Indianapolis all the time, working with legislators, talking, making the case. This is why, you want to do is, understand who your resources are. So you go talk to that person, you talk to that person, and, just working as a team. And it was just a very real experience for me and very heartwarming and one I will never forget. So I don't know how you top that, but I remember earlier in my career, and you might say the same, if you were asked something about East Chicago, so when the Wolf Lake project had been complete, they had a groundbreaking, ribbon cutting. I just went there to cheer them on. I went there in the morning, I remember, and I just wanted to be there because, it's my hometown and I was very happy about it. Well, they were happy too, and they asked me to come say a few words, and I had been, I'm just here cheering you on. That was a very heartwarming experience too, because I didn't have any notes up there. I just went up there, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but I remember finding the words very easily, because when it's your hometown, and you're able to say, even if I've moved away, I live somewhere else, I'm able to look back every time I drive past and just say, I worked with the city on that, and I worked with their team on that. And we, thank goodness for, the mayor's vision and their team and how we just got it across the finish line. Very exciting. But I kind of feel that way for all of our projects. But that one in particular was I think, a little bit more, important and because of different reasons.
Right. And Wolf Lake is a major event venue now. I mean, because they have the Festival of the Lakes that's coming up.
Yes, they do.
In the next week or two, I believe. I forget the exact date. But yeah, that's a major.
Oh gosh, and it draws so many people in there. I try to go every year. And very fun to do that. And if you haven't had the experience most of the shows are free. Right. You can get the VIP tickets and allows you closer access and some other perks. But even not, I mean, just to be able to experience that, and they get some pretty good acts. It's just fun. It's just overall just a fun time.
This year, one of the highlights is Lil Wayne. So
Lil Wayne, yeah.
He'll be there.
No, he will be there.
Last question. You worked with and been alongside with a lot of developers and a lot of communities that have done successful development, in their communities. What have been some of the common traits that you have seen amongst the developers and amongst the municipalities that make a development successful?
Yeah, that's a great question. That it's taking me back to some trips that there's an entity here in Northwest Indiana. They're called One Region.
Yes.
And, they're very interested in helping to, kind of showcase Northwest Indiana. So they took us on quite a few trips to, New Jersey and Pittsburgh and Denver, places where development has been successful. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it was around the rail line. So it's very, pertinent to what we're doing here. And, most of them said, they all had challenges and they all always will. But just to have, and I found this interesting, just, make sure you have kind of a central agency kind of guiding all of this. Because if you don't, then consensus is very hard to reach. So I had thought, while I'm listening to, how this is done across the nation, thinking, this is what the RDA is doing. So it was a bit validating, because then I thought, okay, well, we got to keep going. And, so we love developers. I love talking with the development community. We're doing our outreach now. Yeah, that's the other part of those transit development districts. So part one is getting them established. Part two is building them up. So There's a lot of communication with RDA, the communities and the developers, and the communities. Like I said earlier, if that's what they want to see, then that's what the RDA is gonna help. So yeah, just talking with the developers and understanding what they want to do here and trying to make sure that that's what the communities want to see too. I think that's a perfect role for the RDA. So yeah, it's a learning experience. We've not done this in Northwest Indiana before, and it's happening right here as we sit here and speak. Construction is underway with the train projects and all the development that's happening because of it. And I think once those transit development districts start actually accumulating the increments, a whole different conversation that we're going to be having with the developers. And it's going to be great. And they're going to see, okay, there are more incentives that they will have access to, whereas in the past, they wouldn't have had access to that. And I think it's going to make for an excellent partnership with all of us together. And I'm excited about the future. And I know you are too.
100%. Definitely a conversation I'll be looking forward to having in the future.
Yep.
About the developers and development.
Yep.
So, Sherry, definitely want to thank you for your time. It has been a pleasure. If people want to learn more about RDA, the various projects you guys fund, or even, kind of more about you or, your role in all of this, what is kind of the best place for people to find you?
Yeah, I'm probably the website would be the first place. We have the ones for the transit development districts, nwitdd.com. You can call our office. All the information's on there. We have our government website and .gov/RDA has all our contact information. We have a great staff. So whoever you want to get a hold of, they'll make sure it's routed to the right person. So, and we love to answer questions out there that people have and keep engaging in the community.
Awesome. Again, Sherry, thank you. Again, to my listeners, thank you all for tuning in. Again, this is episode 6 of the Wealth and Real Estate Development Podcast. Thanks again to my special guest, Ms. Sherry Ziller, who has given up her time and her knowledge. It has been a great conversation, and we will continue it. Let's get wired up. You all have a good one. Feel free, definitely go subscribe, go like, go subscribe to YouTube. You can find me on Spotify, still working on Apple, but look forward to connecting to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please share this content with someone else who would benefit from it. I'm looking forward to having you with me on the next episode. Now go out and create some wealth and real estate development.